Oma Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savahutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vikanscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhye Vacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, we may have been a little ambitious, thinking that we'll get finished with the entire chapter. But let's see what Krishna arranges and how many questions are. So we're starting on verse 17.
Krishna Prabhu, can I just take a brief moment to remind devotees to please turn your videos on throughout the sessions? That will be considered present from an attendance standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's so much better for the speaker when they don't see a black screen, but they see a person's face. I can understand if you're in your pajamas or something, or you're having breakfast, but other than that, it's nice. So a lot of this next section from this verse 17 up to almost like 35, 30, is about setting the right example and doing detached work as a means of setting the right example. So doing work because it's meant to be done. And we know in the purport, Prabhupada brings us up to Krishna level, but let's also remember that we're in the third chapter. We haven't gotten to the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita yet. Okay, so verse 17 of the third chapter. Yash Patma Ratir Eva Syad Atma Triptas Chamanava Atmanyeva Chasantushtas Tasya Karyam Navidyate. But for one who takes pleasure in the self, whose human life is one of self-realization, and who is satisfied in the self only, fully satiated, for him there is no duty. And Prabhupada writes that due to the devotee being Krishna conscious, all impiety within him is instantly cleansed, an effect of many, many thousands of yajna performances. So here Prabhupada is comparing karma yoga without connection to God with bhakti, that it may take many, many thousands of yajnas to get the same effect of being Krishna conscious. So these verses here are describing 17 and 18, this atmarati, or one who takes pleasure in the self. And such a person, they're not concerned with loss or gain while doing their duty, and we should be the same. We're not worried. They're not worried about obstacles either. In 18, it says Naiva tasya kriten narto vyakriten neha kaschana nakasya sarvam bhuteshu kaschit artha vyapasrayaha. A self-realized man has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties. What's that? Oops, somebody just went off of mute. Nor has he any reason not to perform such work, nor has he any need to depend on any other living being. So we're going to hear more. So I'm going to keep going because this becomes clear. It says, well, he doesn't have to do any duty. What? Well, let's see. But Prabhupada writes, a self-realized man is no longer obliged to perform any prescribed duty, save and accept activities in Krishna consciousness. So he's not obliged, means he doesn't have to do it, he or she doesn't have to do it for their purification. They do it for another reason that we're going to hear in the next few verses. But the impetus to do it is different, because if one is actually in performing bhakti, remembering Krishna, then the material duties don't necessarily apply, but we're going to hear that they still do them for a different reason. So let's just keep going though. Tasmad ashakta satatam karyam karma samachara ashakto hya charan karma param apnoti purushaha. Therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty, for by working without attachment, one attains the supreme. So working without attachment, being active, but not being attracted to this world. Prabhupada writes, a person, therefore, second sentence, a person, therefore, acting for Krishna or in Krishna consciousness. So you see how Prabhupada is bringing this up to the bhakti level. Under proper guidance and without attachment to the result of the work, is certainly making progress towards the spiritual goal of life. Arjuna is told that he should fight in the battle of Kurukshetra for the interests of Krishna, because Krishna wanted him to fight. To be a good man or a non-violent man is a personal attachment. But to act on behalf of the Supreme is to act without attachment for the results. So it means, we still, for example, we want a good result. We want to distribute a lot of books. We want to distribute a lot of prasadam. We want to attract many, many people to Krishna consciousness. But it's not anything for ourselves. It's only for Krishna's pleasure. So that's still a non-attachment in the sense that in using the word attachment in a negative connotation, negative sense. And also the devotee, ultimately, they try their best, but they leave the result up to Krishna. So we've said this so many times that just Krishna's trying to put it into our brain, that working without attachment is real renunciation. It's based on knowledge. And now Krishna gives an example of one who's elevated to perfection by working without attachment.
Then how to communicate with you people?
I think somebody is not on mute. Now it's okay. All right. So karma naiva hi sangsidhim astita janakadaya loka sangraham evapi samprashyan kartum arhasi. Kings such as Janaka attained perfection solely by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work. So Arjuna's famous throughout the planet at that time. So if he didn't perform his work, other people would follow that example. So here Krishna is giving an example of Janaka. Prabhupada writes, kings like Janaka were all self-realized souls. Consequently, they have no obligation to perform the prescribed duties in the Vedas. So there's a nice story about Janaka, which probably many of you know. But there was a rishi who was giving a Bhagavad Gita, famous rishi, and in Janaka's kingdom. And Janaka was going every day to hear the Katha. And there were many other sadhus in the kingdom who were attending. And they had, if they came from far away, they had, little thatched huts, little places that the king arranged for their simple their simple life and, keep their few belongings and like that. So one day Janaka was late. And instead of starting, the rishi waited for King Janaka. And the other sadhus were starting to get a little critical, like just see how powerful this king is, that he can even control the brahmanas. The Brahmins will not, just see how the Brahmin is under the control of the king. He's probably giving him very, very nice facilities. Yeah, and they were starting to get a little critical of the rishi for waiting for King Janaka, thinking that why should he wait? It's the Bhagavatam is the Bhagavatam. We're here. Why wait for the king? So they were a little critical. So then the next day or a day later, one of the messengers comes running into the katha. So anyway, the king finally showed up and the katha went on. So then the next day, the messenger from the court came running in and said, Maharaj, your treasury is on fire. Please come quickly. We have to put it out. We have to save, And the king said, well, you contact this minister, tell him to do this. You contact so-and-so, tell him to do that. You contact so-and-so, tell him to do that. Go quickly. You're not going to come and do this yourself? No, I'm listening to the Bhagavatam. You please go and do it. And the messenger went, and the king, the fire was put out, and everything went nicely. So then the next day, someone came running and said to the sadhus that were there, your little huts are burning. There's a fire, and you're going to lose your kopins or something. If you don't come and get them right now, or your bag. And they all start running out to save their few belongings. And the rishi the next day says, just see. You might have lost a couple of, a bag or a kopin or two or something, and you run out to get your possessions. And the king could have lost all the treasury, and he stayed for the Bhagavad Gita. Now you know why I waited for the king to before I started the recitation. He has a taste for the Bhagavatam. So that's Janaka Maharaj. And in case you ever run into someone who says, why was Krishna telling Arjuna to fight? Well, here's one explanation that's very nice. In the middle of the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, Lord Krishna and Arjuna, the Lord's eternal friend, had no need to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra, but they fought to teach people in general that violence is also necessary in a situation where good arguments fail. Before the battle of Kurukshetra, every effort was made to avoid the war, even by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the other party was determined to fight. So for such a right cause, there is a necessity for fighting. And as we said last week, really, Krishna wasn't really inciting him to fight, but more inciting him to do his duty with devotion. Because really he was teaching him to be self-realized, which is not usually how you would inspire a Kshatriya to go out and fight, to be shanti shanti. Right? Okay. I will do one. Well, we'll stop here and then we'll go to the next few verses that talk about setting an example. So some questions, comments, thoughts on this? It's clear? Clear as mud? Okay, then we will carry on. Thank you. So many people have their video on. All right, so now a very famous verse. Yad yad achabati shrestas tatar eve taro janaha sayap pramanam urute lokastad anuvartate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standard he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. Prabhupada writes that people in general always require a leader who can teach the public by practical behavior. A leader cannot teach the public to stop smoking if he himself smokes. Lord Chaitanya said that a teacher should behave properly before he begins teaching. One who teaches in that way is called acharya, or the ideal teacher. And Prabhupada tells that story of, or I don't know if Prabhupada tells that story of Mahatma Gandhi and the mother who said, could you please, Mahatma Ji, could you tell my son to stop eating sweets? You know, all know that story, is that famous throughout India? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes, Prabhuji.
No, you don't, Mataji, you don't know. Okay, it's a short story. So Mahatma Ji says, all right, you come back in 2 weeks. So she comes back in 2 weeks, and Mahatma Gandhi says to the child, stop eating sweets. The child, this is Mahatma Gandhi. Okay. And the mother says, thank you so much. But one question, Mahatma Ji, why did you tell me to come back in 2 weeks? And he said, first, I had to stop eating sweets. So it's a well-known verse in the Bhagavad Gita. And very few people, think that, oh, I'm not so qualified as this great person, and they just think they can imitate. So there's a difference between imitating and following in the footsteps. And we know that it's a very practical part of the world that famous people or great people, people imitate them, right? Like if you wanted to sell a lot of your running shoes, let's say you manufactured running shoes. So if there was a picture of a famous actor or actress, right, wearing those running shoes, you're going to sell a lot of them, right? Because people want to follow a famous person, right? Or the way, or even in ISKCON, I remember there was a time when we would get these really nice shoes from South Africa for men. It's very slip-on, but very nice, kind of stylish. And after a few, Bhakti Maharaj was wearing, and this Maharaj and that Maharaj, everyone wanted to get them. Everyone wanted to get them like that. So it's a tendency that what a great person does, what a famous person does, common people want to follow. So whether it's clothing or even, not so much in ISKCON, but hairstyle or this or that, it's a standard thing. It's the way human society works. So we have this really challenging situation because we are meant to set a good example. And I'm sure many of you, when you're in your office, people know that you're a devotee of Krishna, an ISKCON member. So if you do something bad, then they'll say, what is this ISKCON? Right? So we're kind of on the spot if people know that we're a devotee, what to speak if we're, going in, with tilak on, and, the sure sign of a ISKCON devotee. There's, like in Vrindavan, I remember one devotee was joking that you can tell an ISKCON devotee a mile away because compared to the Brijbasis, because for the men, because their dhotis are very white, and the Brijbasis, their dhotis have gotten a little, grayish or something like that, or off-white. Right? So, of course, that's an ISKCON devotee. Like that. So this is a duty and a responsibility that we have to set a good example. That doesn't mean we have to be perfect. As a matter of fact, I was attending this past week this past weekend for us, we had a retreat here in our temple in Washington, D.C., and we had Ramapad Maharaj and Mahatma Prabhu both speaking, giving seminars. Mahaprabhu joined in the 60s. He's a spiritual master, and Prabhupada disciple. So he was talking about some interesting points. What was the point that I wanted to make? About setting a good example. Oh yes, about being perfect. So we're not necessarily expected to be perfect, but for us, the endeavor for perfection, that is perfection. Should I say that again? The attempt, the endeavor for perfection, even if you're not there, that's okay. But the endeavor, that is your perfection. So just making that sincere effort. I think I told you that Prabhupada was once asked, what about this philosopher? What about that philosopher? Are they Krishna conscious? Are they Krishna conscious? And Prabhupada said that their sincerity is their Krishna consciousness. Socrates, this person, that person, Plato, Aristotle, etc. So that is our perfection, just to try to be a good example. So now in the next verse, Krishna uses himself as an example. Name partasti kartavyam trisu lokeshu kinchana nai navatam abaptavyam varta eva chakarmani. Osana Prita, another name for Arjuna. There is no work prescribed for me within all the three planetary systems. He doesn't have to do any duties. Yeah, if a devotee doesn't have any material duties, what to speak of Krishna? Nor am I in want of anything, right? He owns everything. So he doesn't do a duty to get a fruit. He owns all the fruits. Nor do I need to obtain anything. And yet I am engaged in prescribed duties. The last paragraph, Srila Prabhupada writes, since everything is in full opulence in this personality of Godhead and is existing in full truth, there is no duty for the Supreme Personality of Godhead to perform. One who must receive the results of work has some designated duty, but one who has nothing to achieve within the three planetary systems certainly has no duty. And yet, Lord Krishna is engaged on the battlefield of Kurukshetra as the leader of the Kshatriyas, because the Kshatriyas are duty-bound to give protection to the distressed. Although he is above all the regulations of revealed scriptures, he does not do anything that violates the revealed scriptures. So now Krishna is given two examples, right? He's given Janaka Maharaj, who attained perfection by performing his prescribed duties, and now Krishna himself. So Krishna's, like I said, he owns everything. He's the source of everything. And still he acts according to scripture. So that's explained in 23. Yadi yaham na varteyam jatu karman yatandritaha mama vartmanu vartante manusya parta sarvashaha. For if I ever failed to engage in carefully performing prescribed duties, O Partha, certainly all men would follow my path, right? So if somebody said, well, people do that, right? They do that. And we're going to talk about this in the next verse. But they say, well, your Krishna danced with so many gopis, right? So, but as Prabhupada says in the last sentence, when he was in Dwarka, showing the example of a grihasta, it says from the Srimad Bhagavatam is understood that Lord Krishna was performing all the religious duties at home and out of home as required of a householder. So one might argue that some of Krishna's actions on the battlefield, some of his behavior in Vrindavan with the gopis, they are not really recommended shastric path. And you could say on one level that's true. Although Krishna generally, he obviously doesn't transgress the scriptures that he wrote or he spoke on. But what does he do? What is the one thing that Krishna would do that seems to go against duty? What is his impetus? Why would he do something that seems to be against the scriptures, seems to be even almost immoral? Anyone have an idea?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So when
Yes.
Krishna left the like Yuddhakshetra, he ran away. That also.
Yes,
if
but my
you-
question is, why does he do things that seem to go against scripture? That's my question.
maybe
on.
for the good, well-being of others, and something hidden or
Okay, that's getting
not
that
revealed.
you're getting close. Others?
When
Hare Krishna,
Krishna
Prabhuji.
stole
Yes,
the gopis' clothes and they're taking bath.
Yes, but I'm asking, why would he do that? Since that is against scripture, why would he do that? What's the reason? Somebody's going to ask you this if you go out preaching. Yes, Prabhu.
Because he is the supreme
Wait,
personality
Sham,
of
Sham Krishna. I Sham Kun Prabhu speaking. Yes, Sham Kun Prabhu.
It's because Krishna is the Purusha. He is the enjoyer, and we are part of the Prakriti. So Krishna doing those kind of activities, those examples which the other devotees have mentioned, is fine because constitutionally the nature is different.
You're getting warmer, but okay. Murari Madhava Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Prabhu, sometimes Lord Krishna, he goes to such an extent that he breaks the scriptural rules also to please his devotees and devotees.
There's the answer. He does it out of love for his devotees because thank you very much, Murari. Because of all of Krishna's qualities, his greatest quality is Bhakta Vatsal. The most glorious quality is Bhakta Vatsal. So the only time he would so-called act immoral is for the higher principle of morality, because the highest principle of morality is love, is bhakti. So he only does that to serve the gopis. He only takes up the wheel to attack Bhishma because he loves Bhishma out of his devotion to Bhishma. And also his devotion to Arjuna, actually, both worked out. So the only time Krishna acts so-called immorally, because people sometimes will ask you that, right? Preaching in India especially. And you say, no, he's not acting immorally. He's acting out of the highest morality is love, is bhakti, is prema. So that's we have to be, we should know that for preaching and also be convinced that Krishna is the most moral person. He created morality. Right? But he seems to act different. That's why you see sometimes, right? People say, no, I like Lord Ram better. He was more pakka. But actually, oh yeah, Brajendranath's pointing to someone there. But actually, Krishna's the highest moralist. The highest moralist. And let's see, Krishna's setting an example that he can do anything for his devotees. Yes. So that is something we need. But generally, we see in this verse, going back to this Gita verse, that generally Krishna acts according to script, Paka Grihastha, even though he doesn't have to do that. He's the supreme personality of Godhead. As another one of you said, he can do as he likes, right? Especially here in the West, people say, how can Varaha come out of the nostril of Brahma, and how can Nishingadev appear from a pillar? And depending on who I'm talking to, I might just say, well, who's going to stop God from doing whatever he wants? Does he have to conform to your idea of what God should be like? Or do you have to conform to the reality of what he's like? Which one is it? You only accept a God if you only accept God exists if God is the kind of God that you can understand with your brain? No. One of the, Krishna is achintya. He is inconceivable. And he can appear as Kalki, he can appear as Matsya, that whole Matsya avatar, what to speak of. He can appear as a hog, as a boar, Vrahadev. And he comes out of Brahma's nostril. Was Vyasadeva just thinking, let me think of something really weird here and make it up and write it down. Right. So Krishna can do as he likes. So that's also true as I forget the devotee who said that, but that was also accurate. It was Shamkund Prabhu. Is that what it was? But that was true. But the highest thing was what we heard is out of love. Okay. So so one or two more about this, and then I'll I'll take if you have any questions or comments right now.
I have a question.
Yes.
We glorify Bhagavan as creator, maintainer, destroyer, everything.
You
But
glorify him
says,
like that. I don't. Go ahead.
But Bhagavan claims that I have no prescribed duty for me in all the three planetary systems.
Right. Correct. So what's the problem?
So as the creator and destroyer and maintainer, is he not having enough work for him, Prabhu?
No, Krishna's playing the flute. He's dancing with the gopis. He's tending the cows. He says, "Okay, Vishnu, chalo, you do it." So the Krishna's plenary portions or parts of plenary portions, they're like the executive vice presidents. Although they have the same, the Vishnu tattva, it's like one candle that lights the next candle. But still, Krishna is in a special category. He's not an avatar. He's avatari. He's the source. And so little things like creating this world, maintaining this world, destroying this world, it's like he lets someone else take care of that. He's got much more important things. It's much, much more important to dance with the gopis than to create some universe. Anyone can create some universe. Yeah, go ahead, Vishnu, you do that. Right. So, so your question was, what was your question exactly, bro?
No, but Bhagavan claims that I have no work prescribed for me in all the three planetary systems. But
right.
when he supervises all these things, how to understand that Bhagavan says, I don't have any work.
But still he acts, he says, but you see, he says he doesn't have, in other words, it's very simple explanation. He doesn't have to do it. If he says, okay, I'm not going to create any more universes, and who's going to stop him? But still he does it. And that we're going to find out in a few verses from now, why he does that. And again, indirectly, at least, it's out of love. It's out of love for us to give us the opportunity to go back home, back to Godhead. So I was answering your question one way in the beginning. Now I'm answering it a little differently. They're both accurate. That he's not obliged to do it, but he still does it. Like he doesn't have to come at the end of Kali Yuga as Kalki Avatar, but he will. No one's forcing him to do it. Right.
His own will.
Pardon me?
On his own will.
On his own will. His own sweet will. Yes, that's right. That's right. And that is something that we should really meditate on, that Krishna is a person. So Krishna consciousness is not exactly a formula. We try our best. We try to chant attentive japa, right? We try to have a good schedule. We try to have good sadhana. And we do that, but we know that ultimately Krishna revealing himself to us, giving us a higher taste, that's up to his sweet will. It's not like there's a formula, because that happened to Narada Muni, right? He went to the forest. He said, "Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya," and then the Lord appeared before him. And then the Lord disappeared. And then he said, "Well, it worked one time. Let's try it again." And the second time it didn't work. And Krishna appears as a voice and says, "I'm sorry, you will not see me again in this lifetime." And then he goes on to, but it wasn't just a formula. If we have a job that relies a lot on formulas, like if you're the CFO, the chief financial officer, or a CP, a chartered accountant, or what was the other kind, a kind of cost accountant, or this and that. Things are very formulaic. But bhakti, you're dealing with the person Krishna. Now, of course, he wants to give his mercy, but we understand that it's nothing. His mercy is independent of us. Okay, so we do our best, but ultimately, it's as you said, he's independent. It's up to his sweet will. Is that all right?
Okay.
Any other comments, questions? Marai Madhava Prabhu says, sometimes in ISKCON devotees in the present time, and also many stages in Puranas, leave their home and family for higher sadhana and siddhi. Material senses seems to be a bad example. How to understand this, Prabhuji? Oh, good question, Marari Madhava Prabhu. Well, most of us, like how many devotees do you think there are in ISKCON? Initiated devotees, I don't know. 1 million, let's just say 1 million. I mean, who knows, but maybe let's just say 1 million, okay? How many sannyasis are there? There's about 180. Maybe 200 at the most. So there's not too many who are setting the example of renunciation. So most of us are grihastas, some brahmacharis, of course, also. So they can set the example for family people. And in one sense, there's a big advantage to being a grihasta and preaching Krishna consciousness, because people can relate to you more than to the renunciate, right? They can say, "Oh, so you work in a corporate company, you're working corporate, and you're a devotee of Krishna. Oh, I could do that. That makes sense. You're in the IT profession and you're a devotee. Oh, I could do that." Right? So in one sense, our grihastas have this great advantage in preaching. If someone sees a sannyasi now, they might get very inspired by him, but they're probably thinking, I don't think I'm going to do that. At least not right away. Of course, some people become brahmacharis. So it's not a bad example. And also in ISKCON now, there's many rules about taking sannyas. You can't just do it. You have to have, practically speaking, you have to have permission from your wife. You have to have set your family up financially so they don't have any hardship. And this and that. You have to do it dutifully, because as you said, Marai Madhava Prabhu, in the early days of ISKCON, there was this kind of, I get married when I'm 21, and when I'm 22, I take sannyas. Things like that, right? So, and one other thing, by the way, Marai Prabhu, is we need examples of vanaprasthas, right? People who, towards the end of their life, become more renounced. So it's funny, Krishna kind of forced me into that. I'm living in the brahmachari ashram right now. This is the brahmachari ashram here. And it's not because I don't get along with my wife. But what happened is we're building a new temple here in Washington, D.C. Maybe I told you this already. We're building a new temple here in Washington, D.C. And so we had to tear down some of the Grihastha housing in order to build where the new temple is going. So all the families we got who live on the property, we got them located except for one couple who just had a 6-month-old child. So what to do? And we tried everything to try to find a place for them. So finally, we decided, I have a house that I'm renting about like 1 kilometer from the temple. So my wife moved into the basement. I moved into the Brahmachari ashram, and we allowed that couple to have our place in our house, like that. So Krishna kind of forced me to try to be a vanaprastha. Didn't have much of a choice in the matter, right? So, but so we should, in whatever ashram, sannyasis should show good examples of being a sannyasi. Brahmacharis should show good examples of being brahmacharis, grihastas and vanaprasthas as well. I hope that helps, Murari Madhava Prabhu. Is Krishna's mercy uniform for all his creatures? No. Because yayatamam prapadyante, we're going to learn this in chapter 4, verse 11 of the Gita, that he reciprocates with us according to the intensity of our desire. So it's available for everyone. Correct. That's correct. Aparimitapati. It's available for everyone, but it's based on our sincerity. Krishna reciprocates with that. So although it's available for everyone, the gopis are the highest devotees. I hope that answers your question. Okay, anything else? You are all such great souls. It's
Hare Krishna, right?
5:30 in the morning, you come to class. Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhu, I have heard that bhakti is transcendental to varnashrama. How do I understand?
Because varnashram is about this body, right? It's about, whether this body is a student, or this body is married, or this body is renounced, or this body is a lawyer, or this body is a doctor, or this body is whatever. There's all these different upadhis, whereas devotional services, the only upadhi is I'm Krishna's servant. And one who's situated on bhakti, on the level of bhakti, is absorbed just in their eternal relationship with Krishna. Now, varnashram can become connected with bhakti when we are devotees practicing varnashram. Okay, so being a brahmachari and studying Krishna consciousness, being a devotee grihastha, like that, that's then it's called Daivi Varnashram, or Daiva Varnashram. I was just listening to a devotee who was talking directly to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said that Varnashram is very simple. If you're a lawyer, be a lawyer for Krishna. If you're a doctor, be a doctor for Krishna. And especially in those of us living in the city, which I assume is most of you, so then that makes it easy. Now, a more traditional practice of varnashram is generally would be done in a agrarian, in a farm kind of sense. Like Prabhupada said just before he left this world, he said, I'm going to Giridhari to establish varnashram. I'm going to teach them how to live off the land. Now, my guess is most of you on this call do not live off the land. You go to the store and you buy your sabjis. You go to Mother's Dairy and buy your doodh, your milk. Do they have Mother's Dairy in South India? In North India, they do. Like that. That's my guess. For most of you, you're not growing your own produce. But the traditional varnashram, it's rare. There's Brahmins who are living simply. There's you have the whole thing. So it's not. We haven't been able to totally figure out how to establish it in ISKCON. I hope that helps a little bit. So Varnashram is, and when Prabhupada, someone asked us, said, Prabhupada, aren't devotees transcendental to Varnashram? He said, yes, but who's a devotee? If you were all transcendental, why are some devotees falling down? And he said, therefore because Varnashram, if it's done properly, it's very connected to what we're studying in this chapter. If it's done properly, it makes the mind peaceful. You're a brahmachari, you know what your duties are. You're a grihastha, you know what your duties are. You have your occupation, you do that occupation, you like that occupation, hopefully, and you give some of the fruits to Krishna, and it makes the mind shanti, shanti. I hope that's helpful. Okay, shall we carry on? So we're on 24, is that right? Yeah.
23, Prabhu.
What's that?
23.
23?
Yeah.
No, I did 23.
Yes. 24. Sorry.
23 done. Going
yeah.
to 24.
24.
Utsideyur ime luka na kuryam karma chedaham sankarasya chakartasyam upahan yam ima prajaha. If I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds would be put into ruination, and I would be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all living beings. So there's a long purport here. So Arjuna, if you remember in the first chapter, he said, if I fight, he said, I will be the cause of women being left unprotected, and that will result in unwanted population, Varna Sankara. But here, Krishna counters that argument. And again, he's defeating Arjuna's reasonings by indirectly, he's saying, if you neglect your duty and decline to fight, then you will be the cause of Varna Sankara. And by the way, it's very interesting, the definition of sin or pap in the Vedic culture, one definition is not doing your duty. So Krishna sets an example himself. Now in the next verse, he compares the attached worker to the detached worker. So 25, as an ignorant person, the Sanskrit. Sakta karman yavid bhamso yata kurvanti bharata kuryad bimvams tata shaktas chikir shur lokasangraham. As the ignorant perform their duties with attachment to results, the learned may similarly act, but without attachment, for the sake of leading people on the right path. Purport. A person in Krishna consciousness and a person not in Krishna consciousness are differentiated by different desires. A Krishna conscious person does not do anything which is not conducive to development of Krishna consciousness. Could you imagine if we just followed that one sentence? A Krishna conscious person does not do anything which is not conducive to development of Krishna consciousness. He may even act exactly like the ignorant person who is too much attached to material activities, but one is engaged in such activities for the satisfaction of his sense gratification, whereas the other is engaged for the satisfaction of Krishna. Therefore, the Krishna conscious person is required to show the people how to act and how to engage the results of action for the purpose of Krishna consciousness. So you're working alongside someone and you just say, no, you just add Krishna to your life. And they say, I can do that. You don't have to shave your head and wear saffron. I can do that. So this is for the general people. Of course, we many of our devotees, we have so many devotees in India now preaching on college campuses, but the students may not be exactly brahmacharis, but they're not married. They don't have a job. They're going to school. So that makes sense for them to become brahmacharis. But I would say most of the people that you meet in your workplace are probably not Brahmin, are probably, many of them are married or want to be married or divorced even these days. So Krishna here is giving a general example. So even a perfect person should do their duty. And this is explained in 26. Na buddhi bhedam janayed agyanam karma sanginam yoshayat sarva karmani vidvan yukta samacharam. So as not to disrupt the minds of ignorant men attached to the fruitive results of prescribed duties. A learned person should not induce them to stop work. Rather, by working in the spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities for the gradual development of Krishna consciousness. So we sometimes preach to people, right? It is no use working for Maya. You can't take your gains with you when you die. What will you eternally gain from such work? So that's obviously true. But here, Krishna is recommending an additional strategy, another idea, that encouraging those who are attached to use their work and its fruits for Krishna, for devotional service. So again, Krishna is saying, Arjuna, no premature renunciation without spiritual realization. So this verse is telling us how a person in knowledge should relate to a person in ignorance. The devotee in knowledge should, by their example and by their words, encourage those who are attached to use their fruits in Krishna's service. So this is very practical, right? Isn't it amazing? These verses are very, very practical, in our day-to-day lives. And how to preach Krishna consciousness. So we show the example and then we engage others. That's this verse. Yoshayet sarva karmani. First, set the example and then engage others in devotional work. So in the purport, Prabhupada writes about 3 sentences down, because the conditioned souls do not know anything beyond sense gratification, they study the Vedas to that end, to get sense gratification. So that's that's the Karma Kanda section, right? But through fruitive activities and sense gratification, but through fruitive activities and sense gratifications regulated by the Vedic rituals, one gradually is elevated to Krishna consciousness. So that's the standard quote unquote Vedic system. And a little later, although the ignorant man is not to be disturbed in his activities, a slightly developed Krishna conscious person may directly be engaged in the service of the Lord without waiting for other Vedic formulas. So the thing we just heard about, if even you're a little Krishna conscious, don't worry about the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas and gradual elevation. For this fortunate man, there is no need to follow the Vedic rituals because by direct Krishna consciousness, one can have all the results one would otherwise derive from following one's prescribed duties. Now the next verse is a famous verse. Prakrite kriyamanani kunai karmani sarvasaha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the 3 modes of material nature. So this is, we're going to talk more about this verse when we get to the 4th chapter, because this is one of the several verses in the Gita that talk about the karta, who is the doer. And Krishna herein says that you're a fool if you think yourself the only doer. And Prabhupada talks about that in the purport. He says the materialistic person has no knowledge that ultimately he is under the control of Krishna. So we'll talk about this more. We'll refer back to this verse when we get to chapter 4. In the purport, second sentence, the person in material consciousness is convinced by what? By false ego, that he is a doer of everything. He does not know that the mechanism of the body is produced by material nature, which works under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. The materialistic person has no knowledge that ultimately he is under the control of Krishna. The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is a symptom of his nescience. The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is a symptom of his nescience. Do you know people who are not devotees who take credit for doing everything? Yes, Navadvip, Sachin Mataji.
I think all of us try to take credit for everything. Even devotees try to do that. So it's hard to not think of yourself as a doer. I mean, philosophically, one may understand it, but practically, I think it's very difficult to come to this platform.
Is that what you wanted to say? Is that why your hand is up?
I actually had a question.
I thought so, because I just...
The Bhagavad Gita, the Lord talks about doing your duty, doing your duty. So my question is, at least for devotees, we have some help because of Srila Prabhupada's instructions and purports. But what do non-devotees do who are simply following the Varnashram? What does it mean when you say duties? Where do they find their book for their duties?
Yeah, well, first of all,
Vedas is a huge...
I don't think too many people are following Varnashram, in the world outside of ISKCON.
But if one had to, where would there be definition of duties for each of the Varnashram?
Well, I'm not a big expert on that. Even it's sometimes even called Asuric Varnashram, because if it's not connected with Krishna, what's the use? Dharma svanusita pungsam vishvaksena katasya naparayati katiratim shrama eva hi kevalam. That means it's a waste of time if it's not connected with Krishna. So if you're just doing Varnashram for material elevation, I mean, we said earlier, it's pious because at least you're accepting some authority higher than yourself, but the motive is still totally karmakandic in one way or the other. And who would, in this day and age, who would want to do that? Well, all these different rules and regulations to get material enjoyment, why not just go out to the dance, go out dancing and, buy some alcohol and, get some, whatever. But there are 96% of the Vedas are karmakanda. So there's plenty out there. And I don't know too much about them. We do know in verse 45 of the second chapter, Krishna was pretty clear. Trigunya Vishaya Veda, Nistrigunya Bhavardhana. Nistrigunya means that rise above, right? Rise above the Varnashram system. But we are trying somehow to figure out Varnashram and ISKCON, and we have the ashrams pretty much established, right? Maybe Vanaprastha is a little unclear for some people, but Brahmachari, Grihastha, Sannyasi, those are pretty clear. The other parts of Varnashram, it's a little trickier. We don't have too many farm communities that are, And really, if you want to have Varnashram, you really need a Pakka Gurukul also. So where can they get, where do you get any information? You go to the internet. and who knows, you might even get some bona fide information.
And one more question I have, Prabhu, in relation to this particular shloka, because in the last chapter, Krishna talks about the 5 doers. How is that different from here, where he's talking specifically about the gunas?
Krishna talked about the 5 doers. I think that's chapter 18, isn't it?
Yes, that's what I was asking. How do I?
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Okay.
Bagme. I have to give you a post-dated check. At least till the 4th chapter. At least till the 4th chapter. That's what I said 10 minutes ago, right? So I'm not going to answer your question now. But if you don't feel it's fully satisfied when we get to, I think it's verse 13 of chapter 4. If you're not satisfied, then ask your question again.
Okay.
But you cheated. You went to the 18th chapter. You did. You know what I mean? I'm joking with you. But. Any other comments or questions? Okay, then let's see. We're on verse 28. Yes. Tatvavit tu mahabaho guna karma vibhagayo guna guneshu vartanta iti matva nasajate. One who is in knowledge of the absolute truth, O mighty arm, does not engage himself in the senses and sense gratification, knowing well the difference between work and devotion and work for fruitive results. So, so the tattva vit, the person who, vit means to know, right? And tattva means the absolute truth. So one who's knows the absolute truth, thinks, I'm not part of these 3 modes of material nature. I'm not a product of them, nor do I have any connection with them ultimately, because I'm spirit soul. And Prabhupada kind of indicates that when he says he's convinced about his awkward position in material association. So Prabhupada writes, the knower of the absolute truth is convinced of his awkward position in material association. He knows that he is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, and that his position should not be in the material creation. So this Vaishnava level, right? He knows his real identity as part and parcel of the Supreme, who is eternal bliss and knowledge. And he realizes that somehow or other, he is entrapped in the material conception of life. In his pure state of existence, he is meant to dovetail his activities in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. He therefore engages himself in the activities of Krishna consciousness and becomes naturally unattached to the activities of the material senses, which are all circumstantial and temporary. Okay. Dear devotees, give me about 2 or 3 minutes. I need to go do something and I'll be right back, okay? So take a little break. It's been over an hour. Hare Krishna. Okay, Hare Krishna. Ready for round 2? It's good to actually take a break after an hour, at least when you're my age. Okay, so what book are we reading? Bhagavad Gita? Okay.
Bhagavad Gita.
Thank you. I'm just testing to see if anyone's awake. Okay, text 29, I believe we're on. Prakriter guna sammudaha sajjante guna karmasu tan akrishna vido mandhan Krishna vin na vichalayet. And making sure everybody is on mute. Okay. Bewildered by the modes of material nature, the ignorant fully engage themselves in material activities and become attached. But the wise should not unsettle them, although these duties are inferior due to the performer's lack of knowledge. Prabhupada writes in the very first sentence, persons who are unknowledgeable falsely identify with the gross material consciousness and are full of material designations, right? But we're full of so many upadhis. We talked about this before. Our favorite sports team is an upadhi. Our gender is an upadhi. Our occupation is an upadhi. Our nationality is an upadhi. The state that we live in is an upadhi. That we're a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, a son, a daughter, all upadhis. Now we can dovetail those upadhis in Krishna's service, but for the person who's not connected with Krishna, they're just, when you think about it, they are just absorbed in their upadhis day and night, night and day. It's practically the only thing they're absorbed in. Their various designations connected to this body. So then a little further down in that same paragraph, Prabhupada writes, those who are enlightened in spiritual life, however, and listen to this, should not try to agitate such materially engrossed persons. Better to prosecute one's own spiritual activities silently. Such bewildered persons may be engaged in such primary moral principles of life as nonviolence and similar materially benevolent work. So that's, now you have, if you just read that sentence, this is a perfect example that you have to read everything Prabhupada says, because the next paragraph pretty much negates what we just read. But you hear Prabhupada saying, okay, karma kanda, just do something pious, right? Okay, if you can't, tell them to be nonviolent or some material benevolent work. But now listen to the next paragraph. Men who are ignorant cannot appreciate activities in Krishna consciousness. And therefore, Lord Krishna advises us not to disturb them and waste valuable time. But the devotees of the Lord are more kind than the Lord because they understand the purpose of the Lord. Consequently, they undertake all kinds of risks, even to the point of approaching ignorant men to try to engage them in the acts of Krishna consciousness, which are absolutely necessary for human society. So if you know Krishna, you find some way to try to get them to give them a chance, whether it's prasadam distribution or Harinam Sankirtan or whatever. So, but here in the context of this verse, rather than pushing someone who lacks knowledge to renounce his false activities, right? It's all Maya, just give it up, this bogus working for, Tata, or something like that. What is this nonsense? Krishna is the supreme, not Tata Steel. I used to go speak at Tata Steel in Jamshedpur, so mention it. So instead of just saying that, the why, engage them in activities that will lead to knowledge. So a devotee's mood is approaching such person is, when we do that, it's a very self-sacrificing compassion, right? It's great that devotees will do that. But what's being emphasized here in the verse is that if you emphasize detachment for an unqualified person, that may lead them to a worse condition than if you engage them in something that can, at least karma yoga, connected with Krishna. So now the next verse doesn't just talk about detached work, it talks specifically about bhakti. Mayi sarvani karmani sanyasyad yatmacheta sa nirashir nirmamo utva yudhyasva vigata dvara. Therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me, with full knowledge of me, without desire for profit, with no claims to proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight. So Krishna is ordering Arjuna to fight, but he's also describes the consciousness in which Arjuna should fight. So without desire for profit and with no claims of proprietorship, that means freedom from mode of passion. Those two are in the mode of passion. And freed from lethargy is about being free from the mode of ignorance. So while knowledge, the difference between the body and the soul comes from the mode of goodness, but full knowledge, as it says here, full knowledge, that's beyond goodness and is transcendental, and it indicates the soul's eternal relationship with Krishna. So, and then Krishna adds, Mayi sarvani karmani, that surrender all your works unto me. So Arjuna is, fighting because, it's the right, doing his duty becomes bhakti when that detached work is done in devotion to Krishna. So this is how, we have to follow the whole thing. So although in previous verses, so many previous verses, Krishna is telling Arjuna to do his duty, be detached. This verse is something higher. Do your duty, be detached for Krishna's pleasure. Do it with devotion. In the purport, Prabhupada writes that this verse clearly, in the beginning, this verse clearly indicates the purpose of Bhagavad Gita. So there you go, you see, he didn't say that about the other verse. This is the purpose. The Lord instructs that one has to be fully Krishna conscious to discharge duties as if in military discipline. Such an injunction may make things a little difficult. Nevertheless, duties must be carried out with dependence on Krishna, because that is the constitutional position of the living entity. The living entity cannot be happy independent of the cooperation of the Supreme Lord, because the eternal constitutional position of the living entity is to be subordinate to the desires of it. So that's again one of those sentences that if we fully understood it, we'd be doing great, right? The living entity cannot be happy independent of the cooperation of the Supreme Lord. So a little later, Prabhupada writes that nirashi means that one has to act on the order of the master, but should not expect fruitive results. The cashier may count millions of dollars for his employer, but he does not claim a cent for himself, a paisa. Similarly, one has to realize that nothing in the world belongs to any individual person, but that everything belongs to the Supreme Lord. That is the real purport of Mayi, or unto me. And when one acts in such Krishna consciousness, certainly he does not claim proprietorship over anything. This consciousness is called nirmama. Nothing is mine. And if there is any reluctance to execute such a stern order, which is without consideration of so-called kinsmen in the bodily relationship, that reluctance should be thrown off. In this way, one can become vigata jvara, or without feverish mentality or lethargy. So Prabhupada's telling us to get serious about Krishna consciousness and not be fruitive. Not be fruitive. The cashier counts millions of dollars, but doesn't take one paisa for himself. Some questions, comments on these verses? Okay, then we can carry on if you don't have a question. 31. Yeme matam idam nityam anutishtanti manavaha shadhavanton asuyanto munchate pi karma bihi. Those persons who execute their duties according to my injunctions and who follow this teaching faithfully without envy become free from the bondage of fruitive action. So this is what the outcome is if you preach to people to do their duty and connect it with Krishna. And therefore, Prabhupada at the second half of the paragraph, but an ordinary man with firm faith in the eternal injunctions of the Lord, even though unable to execute such orders, becomes liberated from the bondage of the law of karma. So that's kind of connected to what I said Mahatma Prabhu said, right? Which was, if I can find it, my endeavor for perfection is my perfection. And Prabhupada writes, but an ordinary man with faith in the eternal injunctions of the Lord, even though unable to execute such orders, becomes liberated from karma. In the beginning of Krishna consciousness, one may not fully discharge the injunctions of the Lord. This is a very important sentence. Please listen to this one really carefully. Okay, no falling asleep, no multitasking, no thinking about what's for breakfast. Okay, listen to this. This sentence may save your life. Are you ready? Okay. In the beginning of Krishna consciousness, one may not fully discharge the injunctions of the Lord. But because one is not resentful of this principle and works sincerely without consideration of defeat and hopelessness, he will surely be promoted to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness. So people in this world, many of them, they resent God. Why do I have to worry about what's sinful, what's pious, this and that? I just want to have a good time. Right? So we don't want to ever resent, oh, why did I promise to chant 16 rounds? Why do I have to Ekadasi again? Or I don't have time to read. It's more important for me to read the Times of India or Hindustan Times or whatever. Right? So these are all things that we don't want to resent Krishna. We may not be a pure devotee yet. Prabhupada says that in the purport, that we may not fully discharge the injunctions, but we're not resentful of this principle. There was a time in ISKCON when some people were trying to promote the 3 regulated principles. No meat, fish, or eggs, no gambling, no intoxication. As they were saying, oh, this illicit sex thing is so hard. But that's the opposite of what Prabhupada is saying here. Okay, there may be some struggles, but if you're not resentful, if you're not thinking like, why did Prabhupada make us do that one? That is so difficult. That would have been so easy if he just, no. So that's being resentful of it, but not resentful, saying, okay, I'm really trying, Krishna, I'm really trying. And I really want to come up to the standard that Prabhupada set for us. Even though I may not be on the standard now, I know that's where I want to head. And I know that's what's best for me. And I know that's what's most pleasing to God, to Krishna. So I want to go there. That's not being resentful. That's being, that mentality, that mindset will get us there. It'll get us there. And therefore, if somebody could put in the chat, I think we referred to this verse already, but it's so important. Canto 11, chapter 20, verses 27 and 28. 11, 20, 27, and 28. If you can find that, put it in the chat. That touches on this. And therefore, Prabhupada says that just by not resenting it, you are surely promoted to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness. That's why I said we really should listen to this sentence. It's such a powerful sentence. Right? Such a powerful sentence. Okay, now text 32. Yen tvetad ab yasuyanto nanu tishtanti mematam sarvagyana vimudhams tan vidhi nashtan achetasaha. But those who out of envy disregard these teachings and do not follow them regularly are considered to be considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled and ruined in their endeavors for perfection. And why is that? By the way, I'll put it here. It's 11, 20, 27. Why is that? A disobedient, third sentence. A disobedient person, however great he may be, is ignorant of his own self and of the supreme Brahman, Paramatma, and the personality of Godhead. Why? Listen to these 5 words. Due to a vacant heart. Due to a vacant heart. Now, he still has his heart. It's pumping every day, right? So it's not the material heart. And he still may love the, Indian cricket team. So it's not that kind of heart. But it is an affection for the supreme personality of Godhead. And if that's vacant in the heart, then one can remain ignorant. Therefore, there is no hope of perfection of life for him. If his heart is just there, it is. Having awakened faith in the narrations of my, thank you, Pranav Vallabha Prabhu. Having awakened faith in the narrations of my glories, being disgusted with all material activities, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still being unable to renounce all sense enjoyment, my devotee should remain happy, not miserable. Usually we're miserable, oh God, I'm so fallen. Should remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. Even though he is sometimes engaged in sense enjoyment, my devotee knows that all sense gratification leads to a miserable result, and he sincerely repents such activities. And thank you, Sarva Pavana Nityananda Prabhu, for quoting the same verse. So 33, Sadrisham chestate swasya prakriter ganavan api prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. Even a man of knowledge, that means a jnani, acts according to his own nature. For everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the 3 modes. What can repression accomplish? So, Maya, despite our intelligence, is invested with the potency to push us away from Krishna. That is the strength of the illusory energy. Prabhupada writes towards the end of the purport, therefore, without being fully in Krishna consciousness, one should not give up his occupational duties, nor no one should suddenly give up his prescribed duties to become a so-called yogi or transcendentalist artificially. It is better to be situated in one's position and try to attain Krishna consciousness under superior training. So don't be, stani stita shrutika tam tanam bhagman over here that Lord Chaitanya spoke this, I think it's originally spoken by Lord Brahma. Stay in your position. You don't have to take sannyas, but add Krishna to your life. So now the next verse answers the question: if we are all helplessly forced to act according to our nature, what is the use of so many rules and regulations in the scriptures? The Krishna says in 34, Indriyas yarte raga dvesho vyavastito tayor navasham agachet to yasya paripantino. There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion because they are stumbling blocks, paripantano, on the path of self-realization. So we do what our mind tells us to do. And because the mind is surrendered to the senses, whatever we're attached to, raga, we do. And whatever we're adverse to, dvesha, we avoid. So here Krishna is telling us that our action should not be based on that attachment and aversion. That's stumbling blocks on the path of liberation. So, the senses, let's face it, they're attached to the pleasures of this world, money, money, sex, etc. And the conditioned soul is repulsed by holy places, fasting, following the Guru's orders, etc. So the Shastra tries to get us to shift our raga and dvesh away from sense gratification by encouraging us to perform our duty with the ultimate gain of Krishna's pleasure. So the next verse stresses that we should perform our duty. It is Shreyan Swadharmo Viguna Paradharmat Swanushtitat Swadharme Vidhanam Shreya Parodharmo Vayavaha. It is better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the cause of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duty, for to follow another's path is dangerous. So, as Prabhupada says in the purport, we have material and spiritual prescribed duties. But whether the material or spiritual, we should stick to our prescribed duties even up to death, rather than try to imitate someone else's. Because duty, like a medicine, is prescribed to an individual, right? But then Arjuna says, "Oh, descendant of Vrishni, by what is one compelled?" Well, actually, this we'll wait for the next class. I think we could end here for today because we covered a lot. We covered almost 20 verses, and then yeah. But let's look at this purport a little bit more. Materially prescribed duties are duties enjoined according to one's psychophysical nature, our mind and body condition, under the spell of the mode's material nature. Spiritual duties are ordered by the spiritual master for the transcendental service of Krishna. But whether material or spiritual, one should stick to his prescribed duties even up to death rather than imitate another's prescribed duties. Duties on the spiritual platform and duties on the material platform may be different, but the principle of following the authorized direction is always good for the performer. So doing duty is great, whether it's material or spiritual is better. When one is under the spell of the mode's material nature, one should follow the prescribed rules for his particular situation, varnashram, but should not imitate others. For example, a brahmana who is in the mode of goodness is non-violent, whereas a kshatriya who is in the mode of passion is allowed to be violent. As such, for a kshatriya, it is better to be vanquished following the rules of violence than to imitate a brahmana who follows the principles of non-violence. Everyone has to cleanse his heart by a gradual process, not abruptly. That means don't just take sannyas willy-nilly. However, one who transcends the modes of material nature and is situated, oops, I lost my spot. Well, I'll go to the next sentence. In that complete stage of Krishna consciousness, the Kshatriya may act as a Brahmana, or the Brahmana may act as a Kshatriya. In the transcendental stage, the distinctions of the material world do not apply. We just said that, right, about all the upadhis. For example, Vishwamitra was originally a Kshatriya, but later he acted as a Brahmana, whereas Parashurama was a Brahmana, but later he acted as a Kshatriya. Being transcendentally situated, they could do so. But as long as one is on the material platform, he must perform his duties according to the modes of material nature. At the same time, he must have a full sense of Krishna consciousness. So, any questions or comments? We covered a lot today.
Prabhu, being a practitioner of Krishna consciousness now, so what is my varna? Because I am working on like that.
Well, what do you like to do for Krishna?
Do preaching activities.
Okay, so then you're kind of a Brahmin, aren't you? That's what Brahmanas do, they teach. Right? Yajana, what is it? Patana, dana pratigraha. So if you like to tell other people about Krishna and preaching is teaching, and teaching is Brahminical. So go out there and be a good Brahmin. In Kali Yuga, it's all kind of like a kitri. Do you have kitri in South India? Right? Because like, for example, in one day, I give a class like this, right? So this is kind of Brahminical. And then I help manage some projects in ISKCON that's kind of more Kshatriya-like. And then I go to my job and try to make a little money to maintain my family. That's Vaishya. And then I take out the garbage on garbage day, and that's like a Sudra activity. So I cover all of them. But that's why I asked you what you like to do. Because usually what we like to do is what we're good at. And what we're good at, we should offer the best thing to Krishna. Shamkun Prabhu, you have your hand up.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. It's
I hope.
Just based on what you just said and this particular verse, I have some thoughts, and I'd like to ratify it from you. In just a minute. So here we have this verse: better to discharge one's prescribed duties. There is duty, there is dharma, and then there is nature, which you were talking about. And you just mentioned during the course of a day, we do so many things, but there is probably one dominant nature. It's just an observation. I'm not saying this is truth or something. It's much more easier to see in India, a little in the West, but more so in India. We have people whose families were predominantly at some point in time either in Brahmana or Kshatriya or Vaishya.
Yeah, like Marwaris, you know who they are.
Yeah. So what we see here is when people from that background come to Krishna consciousness, they do carry forward those traits in various ways. For example, a person who's coming from a Vaishya background becomes very good in expanding the movement further. A person who comes from a Kshatriya background is probably very good in administration and getting things in order, getting people to follow a particular set of rules and regulations, etc. And those who come from a little of the Shudra background, they expect guidance from others, and they're very good in executing orders from others. So here, I think in following one's prescribed duties for a good amount of time until we really get perfection in chanting the holy name, etc., probably a good starting point is that if we have this strong trait from our family background, better use that in Krishna service. Would this be a right way forward?
Yes, that's fine. And because we're Vaishnavas, the Brahmin is no better than the Shudra. The Brahmin Vaishnava is no better than the Shudra Vaishnava. They're both, the main thing is not the Brahmin or the Shudra, the main thing is the Vaishnava. And we come together, we chant Hare Krishna together, we dance in Kirtan, we hear the Bhagavatam, we take Prasadam together. So it's not this whole, I'm better than you, and like you go into, I don't know if they must do it electronically now, but when I lived in India, you look at the Sunday paper and they say, light-skinned Brahmin looking for a similarly light-skinned girl must, he has green, I have green card and making so many lakh rupees per month, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah.
I mean, just on this point, Prabhu, what you said now, Sadanand Keshav Prabhu, who just asked a question a few minutes ago, and we both are part of this matrimonial bureau in this temple. And we have been thinking about this topic for quite some time, just like exactly what you said now, in trying to find a suitable boy and a girl and helping devotees. I'm married, but for others who are trying to get married, etc. One thought that comes up is, can we say that use the Shastra's barometer as a nature corresponding to any of these varnas? They are getting into the Grahastha ashram, that is fine. But any of these varnas, and see accordingly, like they're like for the boy, whether the girls also have a similar background. Otherwise, it will cause a lot of difference there. So could that be like a starting point?
It's hard to say. I'm not much of a matchmaker. That's not one of my expertise. The reason there's different things you can look at. Obviously, you can look at the charts, right, and see if there's some compatibility. But like, for example, I can't remember the name, but there was like in British history, there's some like clear things where like the person's a prime minister and their wife was like, a simple person, and they had this great marriage, right? She let him be the intellectual and he let her, take care of all the things. And it was just like, great. So you would say, well, they're not the same varna, but, they complemented each other, So we do have Anuloma and Pratiloma in the Shastra, right? And things like that. So I would say you can use it as a guide, but because it's Kali Yuga, there's other things that you might want to look at, right? Their natures, you see, marriage in Krishna consciousness in some ways is more tricky than everybody else, because you're looking for material and spiritual compatibility, right? Materially, they may be totally compatible, right? But one is like service, and the other one is no family. And that can create all kinds of conflicts later on, right? So you're looking for, or, one wants to follow Ekadasi every time and be at the temple as much as possible, and they've been practicing Krishna consciousness for 10 years as a brahmachari, and the other one's kind of brand new, and so there's spiritual compatibility as well as material compatibility. My wife and I are very different. I was born in New York, she was born in Ireland. I have one brother, she has 7 brothers and sisters. Her father was a general in the army. I never even touched a gun in my life. So many, and New York is like another planet than Ireland, right? But somehow we've been married for 32 years and we get along with each other. So there's also some good luck. But I remember, I did we did have our charts done. And I don't know how you all do it. There's also something, at least here in the West, we allow devotees to associate. It's a funny word. Because my son says, Pitta, why are you calling yourselves? They're dating. No, we don't use dating. But, so they can get to know each other a little bit. I don't know how you do it. Do you do it like the first time they see each other when they lift the sari at the wedding day? What's that?
There's all varieties here in India. There's nothing.
Well, I know. There's a lot of love marriages in India also these days, right? It's not all. My marriage was arranged, actually, by the way. Yeah, I have arranged marriage myself. But so Prabhu, my point being is something like this. It's a real intersection of culture, shastra, practicalities, and ultimately just kind of figuring out what works. Because ultimately you just want them to get along and be happy in Krishna consciousness. So whatever is going to, prayena parichiyate, you judge by the results. So good luck. But I would be cautious to only strictly go by the Vedic kind of thing if they have lived in a city their whole life and have, access to internet and TV and things like that, to at least consider other considerations may be helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. But that's just my opinion. That's not shastric. That was just a Vraja Vihari Uvacha thing. I don't know if you're initiated, but Vineet Kumarji?
No.
Okay.
I had a doubt in verse 30.
30. Okay.
Yeah. So how far this verse is from Bhakti Yoga, or
It is Bhakti Yoga.
Okay.
Verse 30. That's what I was trying to say. Maybe I said it wrong. This verse is saying, don't be affected by the mode of ignorance, lethargy. Don't be affected by the mode of passion, profit, and proprietorship. And not just knowledge of the difference between body and soul, but full knowledge of me. That's bhakti. Does that help at all, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji. But why is it mentioned under Karma Yoga?
Krishna doesn't want Arjuna to go too far. You'll have to ask Krishna that. He's he does that sometimes. He sprinkles in some bhakti, but Krishna can do as he likes. It's his book. but he did. I see your point, but it is kind of interesting that in all of this yoga ladder part of karma yoga, he's throwing in some little spices of I don't know if you ever. I don't know if the same thing. I've never been to a movie in India, but in America they have the coming attractions. What's like, and that's other movies that will be coming out soon. So this is almost like a little coming attraction of the 7th chapter, 8th chapter, 9th chapter. Okay. So my wife calls them coming distractions instead of coming attractions. Is that all right, Vinici?
Thank you.
Okay, so you know me, I like to shoot for the rhinoceros. So my request is to read up to text 15 of chapter 4, translations and purports, for next week. Now,
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. There is a
yes.
question. There is a question in the chat, Prabhu.
Okay, I'll look at that in a second. Thank you. There is a chance that I may have to cancel next week. I will let Navadvip Mataji know, and she'll send. It looks like you're all very good at WhatsApp. So I'm going to a retreat next week with His Holiness Sachinandana Maharaj and Madhava Prabhu, the really good singer, and many people who are new to Krishna consciousness. And then that Friday, driving back to New York, and then we have all the festivities around New York Rath Yatra, which is Saturday, the next day. So I don't know if I can stay up late like this Friday night, because I have to be ready for Rath Yatra, but I'll let you know. So we may have to cancel next week. Kya kare? What to do? All right, so last question, a layman question with respect to 4 regulated principles: meat, eating, illicit sex, and to an extent gambling is understandably sinful as they involved in hurting the independence of others. But how is intoxication considered sinful? Because intoxication are taken for one's own body, and in any case, there will be suffering in terms of bodily reactions. But why is it considered sinful as the act itself does not involve hurting others? Well, first of all, Sarva Pavana Nityananda Prabhu, it often does hurt others. Some of the worst kind, for example, some of the worst kinds of domestic violence, when a husband beats a wife, it takes place because the husband is intoxicated. He's drunk, right? I don't know the statistics in India, but most of the car accidents in America are caused by drunk drivers. It's, you know, also, it's it contaminates the consciousness so that there's no real chance. So because actually, Sarva Pavana, this is a great question because it gives me the opportunity to say this because it's a very important point. These are not only ethical things. It's not only about whether you hurt or don't hurt others. They also are four regulated principles of cognition, of cognitive, of understanding God. And it becomes very difficult to have the more subtle mind, intelligence, sharp when we're doing these activities. So it keeps us away from Krishna. That's another answer to your question. And here's another one. Remember we said sins, one definition of sin in Vedic culture is to not do one's duty. So when one is intoxicated, they don't do their duty very well. Right? If they're taking drugs of some kind, right? So from all three perspectives, something is sinful not only because it hurts somebody else, which this does, but also because it hurts our consciousness. Yeah, that's the big one. They're the four principles of cognition. It helps us clear things away so we can see Krishna. I hope that's helpful, Sarva Pavana and Nityananda Prabhu.
Thanks, Prabhu. It's clear.
All right. Boy, what a long name you have. It would be really hard. Sometimes I have to sign so many certificates. If you had my service, it would take you a long time. Sarva Pavana Nityananda Dasa. Your arm would be tired. But it's a beautiful name. And it sounds like the kind of name Jai Pataka Maharaj would give someone. Is that correct? That's my guess. Okay, so Prabhus, we will see you all maybe next week, but I will let Mataji know and she'll send out the message. Mancha kalpa tudubhyascha, kripasan dubhyevacha, kanam pavanebhyo, vaishnavebhyo. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Bhagavad Gita as it is ki jai. Shri Krishna Shri Arjuna ki jai. Gaur Premanandi.